Paul Woolmington, who's the CEO of Canvas, unfortunately had to deal with some personal things today. So in his place is another digital sage and veteran, Greg Johns. Hi, Greg. How are you? It's been a while. Good to see you again. And
good to see you, Drew.
Yeah, likewise. And we have Rita McGrath here as well from Columbia. And for those of you who've been checking out some of the CDX events over the last couple of years, there's Rita. She's back and going to share some wisdom with us. And last but not least, we have Frank. We'll see if Frank comes on here shortly. There he is. Frank from Heineken. I may be having a few of those this weekend, Frank. Just
please. Please enjoy responsibly.
I may have started before this.
Started before that. Well, you know, it's happy hour somewhere, right? So let's just do some brief intros here, and a little bit of a name, title, serial number, but just also briefly a little bit about a day in the life. And Rita, we'll start with you.
Fabulous. Well, I'm a longtime faculty member at Columbia Business School, and this year has been a virtual year. So I've been virtually all over the world. My frequent flyer virtual miles are stacking up there. My work is at the intersection of strategy and innovation. And of course, the whole brand digital topic is absolutely central to those questions right now.
That's great. Thanks, Rita. Greg.
Chief Digital Officer of Canvas. So, you get the digital guy instead of the CEO now, but hopefully appropriate for this. Hopefully appropriate for this.
And tell us a little bit about Canvas for those of us that don't know Canvas in addition
to those of us who don't know Canvas. So we're one of the largest independent media agencies in the US right now. We're actually a joint venture. Two of our shareholders, Horizon Media, which would be the largest independent agency, and then Hyundai's integrated communication agency, Inocean. But we operate very standalone, and we have offices LA, New York primarily, but really we take a regional approach. So we have representation Dallas, Atlanta, Chicago, which has been very important in how we approach the marketplace and how we're growing for our clients. But otherwise, it's a little bit of everything and comes to the world of media. So, I've worked at a lot of holding companies, and as far as the things we do, the things we touch, it looks a lot the same.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, John. Frank, tell us a little bit about, obviously, Heineken, maybe a little bit about Heineken USA and the brands that fall under it, and then a little bit about your role.
Sure. So I lead the media team in the in-house creative studio at Heineken USA. So from a media perspective, it's what I love about it is it's a mix of a bit of sociology and psychology and understanding what people want and how to deliver it to them through a media channel and their sort of daily media consumption habits. And then there's the sort of the dollars and cents behind it. It's making sure that you get the right kind of deal, driving return on investment. And more recently, a bigger part of my job is in the creative realm. So it's that intersection between media and creative, which is so important. I like to say that, we as an industry, we've been running on TV for whatever it is, 70 years plus. We're getting pretty good at that. But that's pretty simple. It's a 30 or 15. Which network do you run on? There's not a lot of levers to pull. On the digital side, and again, the phrase digital is, almost is basically antiquated at this point. There's just endless levers to pull from both a media perspective and from a creative perspective, which makes everything a lot more difficult and keeps people like me and Greg employed. And but from a Heineken USA perspective, it's obviously the flagship Heineken. But we also have, Amstel is in our Dutch portfolio, but we also have a huge Mexican portfolio, mainly with Dos Equis and Tecate. Yep. And we're also innovating a lot too. We have doing a joint venture with Arizona to do a new seltzer brand there, which is just hitting shelves now. You should check it out. It is amazing. So it's all about, like I said before, kind of finding what people want, finding a way to get it to them. Also, just to build on what Greg said, if you don't know who Canvas is, look them up because they're really good. We've been working with them since 2019, and we have seen great impact to our business from the Canvas guys. So shout out to Greg and the whole and all the Canvas team, because it's really impacted our business in a positive way.
Paul Woolmington's a longtime friend, and they couldn't have hired a better person to lead that charge for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Frank. Your check's in the mail. Thanks.
Yeah, you got it.
Well, that's a great setup. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to kick this question off with Rita, but please, I want you all to jump in as opposed to trying to go question, person. Please jump in on this, and Rita and everybody. Talk to us about the last 16 months, Rita. You know, you've done a lot of research in this area. You've talked to so many brands. You've worked with so many brands. What is sort of similar question I had to Shannon? What sort of bubbled up at the top in terms of what are your key takeaways from the last 16 months as it relates to the customer, to the consumer, and then thoughts about sort of, marketing priorities moving forward. And then, of course, Greg and Frank, please jump in after Rita's finished here.
Sure. So I think the watchword is it takes 6 weeks to create new habits. And we've now had over a year of new habit creation. And I think one of the things that a lot of brands are discovering is that they're in the world of innovation, whether they want to be or not, where we've all been plunged into really high uncertainty, where the watchword is learning. And, there's a lot of people out there making predictions about the new world of work and what's going to happen. And those predictions are not going to survive first contact with the reality of the new world of work. We've got people who've been in the office the whole time who are going to resent these intruders coming into their territory. We've got people who've been at home who are, kind of reluctant to emerge into the light because nobody knows what's out there. So I think for brands, the big watchword is, if you've done well so far, steady as you go, but be open to learning what sometimes counterintuitive things you might find when you start doing that marketplace experimentation once more.
And what are customers going to be thinking, demanding as it relates to service? Whether it's they were at home more, whether it was more e-commerce, whether they just weren't out and about as much, but what habits do you think have formed in terms of customers' expectations around service?
Oh, skyrocketing. So a couple of things that I think are really important are our robots have gotten really good. So this notion of containment, when a customer calls and you don't actually ever want them to get through to a human being, I think we need to turn that one on its head, because what's happened now is that automated systems are so good that if I call, I can probably self-serve anything that isn't so complicated a human being needs to help me out with it. So I think we're going to have to really rethink this service level in light of skyrocketing customer expectations. We've bent over backwards to teach people anything you want should be no more than a couple of clicks away on some device. And that's going to be very hard to walk back.
Right, indeed. Greg or Frank, want to jump in on this?
I can start with the, I agree with Reed. I think what we've seen a lot is an acceleration of trends that we've already talked about before. So, Rita's brought up a few of them. People, from a beer perspective, beer is one of the sort of last frontiers from an e-com world, but we are seeing our the big Alc Bev delivery portals like Drizzly exploding hundreds of % year over year, and it's continuing. The big question is, with bars starting to reopen and people being able to go out a little bit more, will those numbers continue? I think that they will. I think that there was a lot of great forced trial. Those platforms will continue to get better. So when you look at a Drizzly or an Instacart or a minibar, it's just kind of a microcosm of the convenience and in what Rita was talking about as far as like what people are demanding now of ease. So I think that's a big thing. Also, the other big trend we're seeing is people they're pushing that trend forward, spending more time with connected TVs over broadcast TVs, and certainly on their phone a lot more as well. And that's stuff that we'd seen in the past. And this is, like if we looked at in 2019, what we expected, we probably accelerated those trends. My guess is 4 or 5 years in 1 year.
Yeah, true. And I'll just shout out to Drizzly, and I use it, and not only is it just nice to be able to get whatever alcohol delivered within a couple hours, but their service and the app, the service, it's Amazon-esque. I mean, it is really, they've really nailed it. They have really nailed it. And I think Uber brought it, I believe, right now.
Yeah, and it does hit on, with both Rita and Frank saying that, I think a watchword that we're going to continue to see, and oh, by the way, this was nothing that came about because of COVID, but maybe only accelerated, is still going to be convenience. And you see that manifest for Alka-Bev, Instacart, Drizzly as mentioned. I think one of the surprising things for me is that, those services have been around a while, but something comes that's so disruptive like COVID, and all of a sudden, people's behaviors that, may not ever change previously or may change at a snail's pace, they all of a sudden got rammed forward at light speed. And, again, marvel at the fact that we all, in a matter of weeks, transformed to a work from home environment. Obviously not everybody in the world, but enough of us. And, change was thrust upon us in ways that we could never imagine, and at speeds we could never imagine. What is going to be most interesting in watching the consumer, again, the great experiment, the biggest sociological experiment of all time is continuing, is whether or not some of these traits we've picked up, these convenience traits, and I think, again, go back to premises are opening. The Knicks are winning playoff games, for God's sake. What's going on in the world? But, I don't know if we necessarily see an either or. All right. I don't know if with on-premise returning, for example, does that mean it's completely supplementary to Instacart? I don't. I think, with respect to Heineken and Frank's business, it's a good opportunity because I think on-premise is going to matter still, but I also think there's more opportunities for convenience with the likes of e-commerce, and all goes well, that's increased frequency of purchase. We're going to see that all over the place, in my opinion.
And what else, in terms of, anyone want to jump in here, Rita or Frank? Let's look at this summer, right? Because there's a session later that talks a little bit about the age of the summer of revenge living, and obviously we're excited and given my last session with Shannon, we're also still a little cautious. But Frank, I'll start with you, maybe just in terms of your approach from both a sort of marketing, messaging, tone, positioning standpoint as it relates to the brands, which maybe fit in nicely to a summer of sort of revenge living feeling.
Yeah, I like that phrase, revenge living. We think that the way that we've been talking about it a little bit has been more making up for lost time, right? Yeah. All those first dates that you missed last summer, all of those gathering with friends that you missed, all of those sort of like really special moments that we have with each other that you missed, there's just, the other phrase we use is just huge pent up demand for that stuff. We think that's going to be a thing. We're looking at, for our Heineken campaigns this summer, those are some of the moments that we're trying to take advantage of. And again, this is purely anecdotal, but we've done in the last few weeks, we activated the South Beach Food and Wine Festival, and there was no shortage of people there. So there's certainly going to be people that are still a little bit too timid to come out, and that's totally fine. And like you're going to do what you're comfortable with. But we had to pivot a little bit and did 2 sessions of the South Beach Food and Wine sort of burger bash thing that we usually do. So we did sort of like almost like a 2-show-a-night thing. So like we did an early and a late, got everybody in for a few hours, tasted everything, got them out, had an hour and a half to clean everything, and then had another group of people in. All in all, we did not see a reduction in attendance. Everyone was a little bit more spread out. And, we went through as much beer as we always do. So there are enough people out there that want to get out and go crazy. I was also happened to be lucky enough to be at Madison Square Garden last night for that Knicks game. It was amazing. There was, 15,000 people in there, everyone sort of like showing their vaccination card on the way in. It felt very, to use an overused term, normal. And personally, it kind of, for me, felt like waking up from a bad dream that was happening for the last year.
I live across the street.
It felt very much like the old days, so to speak. And I was very surprised at how fast my brain went from being nervous to being completely comfortable. Now, that might not be the right thing to do, but psychologically, it was just very interesting to me to like how fast I was high-fiving strangers when people are hitting 3-pointers and catching alley-oops. It was really very interesting.
No, I live across the street from the Garden. I went out to go to my deli right when the game was ending. You'd think the Knicks won the championship.
It was crazy. Yeah.
I mean, it's emblematic of I don't want to say the short attention spans in this country,
Yeah.
but, we've seen this before. And, I've said this, I've gotten admonished for even making this comparison, so I'll apologize. But, go way back 20 years to 9/11, and, nobody was ever going to work in a tall building again. All these different things were going to change and never be the same. Well, we went back to a lot of the same things that we said we would never go back to. And again, this is a completely different scale and a completely different situation. But I do think whether you want to call it resilience or whether you want to call it just short memories, that, experiences like Frank's last night, you're going to get in the moment, and all of a sudden that hesitation to be anywhere near the person next to you, it hopefully will melt away.
And you want your brand to be there in that moment if possible, right?
Yeah.
So Rita, just along the same lines of this conversation, how do you feel about this sort of summer, the consumer with this sort of revenge living attitude? But my question really there is it something that just kind of comes at this big wave this summer and then reverts back to some other? Do we have any historical precedent here, Rita, in terms of customers recovering from these types of mega events and what we might expect as we move past the summer? Maybe I think we know what this summer is going to be like, but what do you see past the summer?
Three things.
We do have a book called Seeing Around Corners, I might add.
Yeah, right. So three
Here
things.
Here we go.
So the first is some of these new habits are going to be well established. And so, people have moved their homes, people have spread out more, people have made pretty irrevocable decisions, and those aren't going to be reversed easily. So I think once the summer's over, we're going to see this sort of uneasy settling into whatever they can claim to be their day-to-day. And I do think there's going to be this huge burst of enthusiasm over the summer. And then for a lot of people, they kind of like the setup that they've got. So they may be more distributed. Offices may be more spread out. Tall buildings may not be as acceptable. So I think we can see a normal that's more distributed, that's a little bit farther out. Second thing I think, unfortunately, we will see is pockets of re-inflammation. And because, vaccines are not widely distributed and there's still a lot of unvaccinated people out there, many of them children, we're going to see places where, okay, there's a big confab set up for, I'll make this up, Cleveland, and 5 days before Cleveland has a big problem, and now all the brands are pulling back and saying, okay, no, we're going to back off from Cleveland. So it's going to add a level of uncertainty to people that plan events, people that plan big occasions and so forth, that I don't think is here today. And we're so black and white, right? We want to, it's either a big problem or it's nothing.
Right.
I don't think we're thinking about what happens in between. Like, what are you going to do if 2 weeks before your primary event or your gathering or your whatever, there's a big outbreak near where you want to be? I mean, this is happening in Singapore right now.
Right.
They were going to have the World
Melbourne's back on a 5-day lockdown, right? Yeah.
Yep. And, we can't even speak about places like India. So I think the reality that this thing is going to be with us for the foreseeable future is something I think a lot of people are in denial about. And I do think as a brand, you want a contingency plan, right? And you want to be able to say, geez, I wish that event could have gone forward, but it can't. We're going to be safe. Here's the alternatives, and here's something we can offer you in lieu of, and I think we have to start thinking in those plan B terms. So that's the second big theme, I think.
And Greg and Frank in partnership, I'm sorry, please read it, finish.
No, sorry. And then just one third theme that I think is going to be very interesting is how the kind of leisure and work come together and I think in both, we're going to have to be a lot more intentional. So as people go back to work, we have to be more intentional about who's not there. If I've got 3 people sitting in the conference room and we're all like together and they've got like a 4th person who's dialing in, do we really want that? Or do we want all 4 of us at a desk dialing in, and so we have to get more intentional about how we're going to interact as human beings.
And Greg and Frank, given everything Rita just said, and I agree, even if the summer is a bit predictable, maybe it gets even a little bit more predictable after that. How does that impact, from a marketing standpoint, and specifically as you get into right down into planning and things like that, and there's this unknown that's hovering over your brand and your partner agency as you look at consumers sort of maybe in this sort of post-summer phase. How is this influencing and informing media and where you're placing it and the tone of your advertising?
Well, and I'll start a little bit with that. I mean, every year there's a watchword in media. In 2020, it was flexibility. I think 2021, there's a lot of people on the network side that would like to see that go away, but I don't think that's something that ever is going to completely leave us now. And, I think one of the things that all marketers learned last year is that, the importance of scenario planning and the importance of a plan B. And, Rita, you hit the nail on the head in that it's going to be great if we're going to be able to run down the same track all the time. But, frankly, whether it's COVID or whether it's something else, it's always something. We're going to be operating more in a world where, perhaps we're doing things in parallel path. And as Frank has to think about an on-site sponsorship, are we simultaneously planning for something else? And it's hard because, businesses have spent the last 30 years pioneering just-in-time inventories and running their supply chains so lean that, you can get something cheaper than you've ever gotten before and get it from China in 3 days. That may be over. To do that extra work, to have that cushion, it's unfortunate. It's going to take more time. It's going to take more cost. We're going to have to find new ways to address that because, I can't go over to Frank and hand him a bill for twice as much money and say, oh, this is the world you have now. That doesn't go all that well because he can't take that up the ladder either.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to build, I think one of our logistics people this summer said, rough seas make great sailors. So we went through a lot in 2020, like, the sort of, I'm sorry, I have to say the word unprecedented, but the unprecedented, again, amount of change that we had. We did, to Rita's point, we built in, we have some new habits now where we are, again, flexibility in putting in flexibility into our plans, but usually it was a little bit, we plan months and months in advance. And, years ago, things wouldn't change all that much. And the plan that we developed 3 months before our campaign was supposed to launch, we ran. We now have more regular check-ins that say, hey, does it still make sense to run our media plan like X, Y, and Z? And, we're still trying to build in as much flexibility as we possibly can because things can go sideways on you. And we saw that big time in the last year plus.
And Frank, just a quick follow-up to that, as you think about these times ahead, how is it specifically impacting your thoughts on the mix? Obviously Heineken does a lot of TV advertising. We do a lot of other advertising as well. Is it, with scenario planning and plan Bs and different sort of, constituencies and demographics that you hit, is it more social? Is it, more just in time, addressable TV? Is it, how does it impact the planning and the mix?
It's pushed us less into the upfront, more into flexible channels like digital. Out of home is the trickiest one because out of home takes the longest lead times. But, and we were trying to, like last year, we were trying to pull out of home as much as we possibly can because people are in their houses and, like trying to get in stores and out of stores as fast as they possibly could. There was no lingering whatsoever. So we were trying to pull out of home as much as we possibly could last year. This whole revenge living, I think, is going to be very good for out of home this year. But again, if things go sideways, you don't want to be over committed to a medium that if, again, God forbid, we have another big lockdown scenario and the streets are back to being empty again. So that's probably the trickiest one. We've done a little bit more digital out of home kind of stuff just to keep it as flexible as we possibly can. But at some point, you got to just make a decision and go, because if you're kind of, you're going to be right a lot of the time, and you're going to be wrong some of the time too. So I think it's also that sort of mind shift of everything has to be perfect all the time to we're going to make the decisions that we can make with the information we have at the time we have to make them. And I think it's a little bit more of that mindset shift as well.
And Greg, my specific follow-up related to that is, and being an old kind of media agency guy myself, is does this, getting in the weeds a bit here, does this really impact fundamentally just the actual planning and buying process? Is it, do you have your plans set quarterly, or do you kind of put them on, do you plan your media around tentpole, either, product launches or things like that? And is it now, hey, every 2 weeks, we're going to come back and look at this plan, or every week? How does it impact the day-to-day, the tactical of planning and buying when we're still in this sort of state of uncertainty?
Well, I mean, let's go to the extreme, and, somebody who studies agile software development tactics and somehow wants them to find their way into marketing more and more every day. But, the industry isn't exactly built for it. Companies aren't built for it. And, media owners that have very scarce properties want nothing to do with it.
Right.
So, you do see some bifurcation. I think, as Frank mentioned, there's going to be elements where, we are going to potentially sacrifice other, pieces of a plan for that flexibility. I mean, you could buy an extremely flexible plan all you want right now, but what happens if it starts to deviate from consumer behavior? Or what happens if it starts to deviate from impact? You can't be flexible at the expense of being effective necessarily. And so, I think that's the line we're going to walk. There are going to be certain things that, because of their scarcity, because, they found themselves to be, nearly impervious to the changes that are wrought with COVID, sport being one of them, for example.
Right.
You see less change there. But that said, if you've got some good news here, it's that in many cases, consumer behavior happens to be moving into media channels, media executions that by their nature lend themselves to be more flexible, at least the capabilities. People that own them, maybe not so much. But, in the end, I think, we're an industry that kicking and screaming, we will innovate. And, ultimately that innovation is going to bear out. We're not going to have to sacrifice being good at the sake of being flexible. A middle will develop.
Indeed. Rita, I'm going to give you the final word here because we do have to wrap. Maybe a little bit around experience. We talked a lot about branding, media, advertising, but the brand extends, of course, all the way down into customer service and the customer experience. Any final sort of parting words here and recommendations for brands and their partners as it relates to brands and the broader customer experience as we wrap this session?
Yeah, I think customers are still a mystery to way too many brands. So my suggestion is really walk along that customer's total experience, and you will be astonished what you find.
That's great. Nice and crisp and succinct. Good advice. Greg,
I have to learn that.
Greg, Rita, Frank, really, thanks so much for joining us. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. Have a Heineken or two or a Dos Equis, and responsible drinking. And I hope to see you all in person on a real stage sometime soon.
Thanks, Drew.
Yes,
Thanks,
please.
everybody. Appreciate it.